welcome to World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, former NBA star Dennis Rodman visits the DPRK, North Korea, while a detained American student is coincidentally released. Is Rodman's visit at the behest of President Trump? U.S. filmmaker Oliver Stone has released a docu-series on Russian President Vladimir Putin. But can a series that humanizes Putin really cool tensions between the two countries? And we begin today's program with former U.S. basketball star Dennis Rodman's trip to the North Korea, the DPRK. At the start of his visit, Pyongyang released an American student who was serving a 15-year jail sentence for trying to, quote, steal a political poster last year. Meanwhile, Washington and Seoul are working on arranging a summit between President Trump and the newly elected President Moon. And the DPRK's constant missile test, the suspended THAAD deployment, what is going on right now on the Korean Peninsula? But first, take a look at this.
A special American friend of the DPRK. The former NBA star Dennis Rodman is on his 5th trip to the DPRK, gaining rare access to its leadership. Some analysts speculated he may be carrying a message from President Donald Trump, who had previously praised his efforts to engage the DPRK back in 2013. Although both the administration and Mr. Rodman denied this.
Well, are you here just as a private citizen? Have you spoken to President Trump at all?
Well, I'm pretty sure he's pretty much happy at the fact that I'm over here, trying to accomplish something that we both need.
And what are you trying to accomplish, sir?
It's trying to open the door. Open the door, that's it.
The Hall of Famer is a rare individual who could claim friendships with both Mr. Kim and Mr. Trump. He traveled to the DPRK for the first time in 2013 and became friends with the leader, Kim Jong-un, at the time. Rodman's trip this year does not only coincide with the release of an American college student by the DPRK, but also with the White House announcement that President Trump will host South Korean President Moon Jae-in for a 2-day visit in Washington, D.C. later this month. On Wednesday, the U.S. Undersecretary of State had a meeting with South Korea's first vice foreign minister in Seoul to discuss the coming summit.
Well, listen, we have an ironclad commitment to our security and well-being, and a commitment to THAAD deployment. So we are going to continue to work on this in a way that's satisfactory for both countries. So I was very pleased with the conversation.
After taking office for just 1 month, South Korean President Moon Jae-in is struggling between China and the U.S. because of the THAAD deployment. At the 17th anniversary of the June 15th North-South Joint Declaration, peace on the Korean Peninsula is still facing challenges under international geopolitics.
And for more on U.S.-Korea ties, with all of this latest development, we are joined here in Beijing studio by Mr. Zhao Tong, associate in Carnegie's Nuclear Policy Program, based at Carnegie's Tsinghua Center for Global Policy here in Beijing. Welcome to our program. In Seoul, South Korea, Professor Oh In-yu, professor at the Korea University. Welcome as well. In Boston, United States, Jim Walsh, Security Studies Program, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. We also try to reach out to North Korea, but for now we do not yet have a panelist for this discussion. For now, I want to start with you, Mr. Walsh. Is Mr. Rodman quite an outlier also, just as President Trump? Really an emissary coming from the United States for Pyongyang?
No, not at all. I think there's a lot of bad speculation going on here. Let me throw a wet blanket on it. Some people say that Rodman's diplomacy is associated with the release of the American recently. That is simply not true. The U.S. Special Representative to North Korea, Joseph Yoon, met with North Korean officials in Oslo, arranged for an agreement that would allow him to visit the Americans being detained, also met with the North Korean ambassador in New York at the UN mission. He went to North Korea, saw those Americans, and then demanded that the young college student who's in a coma be released. That is what happened, wholly separate from Dennis Rodman.
Well, maybe that is true, but Professor Oh, in South Korea, as we have observed, Mr. Rodman has been traveling to the DPRK, North Korea, at some critical times. 2013, 2014, some very successful, some not necessarily so, and this time as well, so much public spotlight.
So you can speculate again on this because it's a timely, coincidental trip by Mr. Rodman to North Korea, indicating various possibilities about his trip, especially his connection to President Trump, for example. But we have no concrete evidence whatsoever about his real official role in DPRK, such as representing Donald Trump's diplomatic missions. But we have some kind of evidence here today that Rodman trip today or in the past had no real diplomatic results that are good for the United States or South Korea.
But at least for now, Mr. Zhao, here in Beijing, we see more news coming from DPRK and North Korea as a result of Mr. Rodman's trip. He met with the Minister of Sports in North Korea. He met also with the female basketball players, a team of them. And also he presented gifts, for example, 2 books, including one book written by President Trump 3 decades ago, The Art of the Deal. Is he trying to say anything? Of course, I know you cannot read his mind, Mr. Rodman's mind, but, you know, does that send any signal to you?
Well, I think regardless of whether Rodman's trip was supported by the U.S. government, apparently he has some relationship, he has some connections, history with Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump tweeted in 2014, I think, that he believed Rodman's visit at that time was more effective than the visits by American officials in dealing with North Korea. But also I think we shouldn't estimate the possibility that Kim Jong-un really wants to send a goodwill signal by inviting Rodman. In history, in China, actually in 1970, when China wanted to improve relations with the United States, Mao Zedong invited Edgar Snow to stand side by side with him on the Tiananmen Tower. And that picture was then published on the first page of Renmin Daily, People's Daily. And not understood by Kissinger, who thought, Snow was a pro-China communist, and therefore he dismissed that signal. And that was an opportunity lost in history. I hope we will not repeat that mistake and really pay enough attention to the signal that was sent by Kim Jong-un.
It's a very interesting point. Mr. Walsh, there might be political reasons that Washington do not necessarily want to link with Mr. Rodman. There might be also practical reasons why Mr. Rodman should not and will never be an emissary. However, it would not prevent the other party of using this trip as a gesture to show to his own country back at home, I mean the North Koreans, and also to show to the Americans what the North Korean leader has in mind right now. At least a try, Mr. Walsh.
Yeah, I agree. I agree that that's a possibility, that the Kim leadership is using this for their own purposes, that this is, Rodman, and I've followed his career since he was in the NBA, and his tragic post-NBA career. He's a person with substance abuse problems. He's touring North Korea right now with a T-shirt. He's basically, a company has paid him to go to promote. It's a Bitcoin company for marijuana dispensaries, and that's what he's promoting.
All right, we don't talk about what he's promoting right now.
Yes,
let's just talk about what about that coincidence.
Your point is well taken. And especially given the fact that this is a delicate moment with the return of that young man who was in a coma for over a year and is now being released. This could be a very difficult time in the U.S. in terms of the optics of that vis-a-vis North Korea. This presents another opportunity. I also think, actually, looking at it as a scholar, no one gets to meet with Kim Jong-un. Almost no one. Dennis Rodman has.
Right.
Even in his impaired state, there's value, it seems to me, for some American to have some interaction with him that he can then, or more likely his staff can then report when he returns to the U.S. So, I'm in favor of getting more data, and if the data has to come through Rodman, then so be it. But I don't think he's going to be acting in an official capacity. But I do think the North Koreans there's a window open. They've been communicating. There's a window open for trying to get something started diplomatically. This may be part of that.
All right, Professor. Oh, observing from South Korea, do you think that is really a window opportunity for the Korean Peninsula, particularly for North Korea and the United States to smooth something out? Or at least, gentlemen, just to talk to one another on certain channels?
Well, it could be a window opportunity, but not for South Korea, but rather for North Korea, because they're using this Rodman card to talk to Donald Trump. They are not indicating any possibilities of talking to South Korea. So South Korea, again, is jammed in between. Here, two powers, North America and North Korea, trying to talk to each other. But here, the card, Rodman card, is very funny indeed, because he has never produced anything concrete in the past. And we don't expect anything to come out of this visit again this year, because he's promoting something else.
Well, whether we can expect anything specific, diplomatic specific, coming from Mr. Rodman trip is probably too far a wish to make. Yet, Mr. Zhao, at this point, Mr. Rodman claimed himself to be a great friend of President Trump, because he was on The Apprentice show, the reality show, even though he failed, eventually got rid of, but you know, he was there. And President Trump talked about him as a good friend. Meanwhile, Mr. Rodman claimed he is a friend of lifelong time with the president of North Korea, Mr. Kim. So it seems that, you know, apparently, at least verbally, he could be something.
Right, indeed. The entire episode is really like a reality TV.
Well, probably more than that, sir.
Even though North Korea wants to portray this release of the college student Wonbia as a good signal of goodwill to the United States, actually it turned out, I'm afraid, going to have a negative impact on near-term engagement between United States and North Korea. Given the fact that this young man has been in coma for over 1 year, and his return has only really increased and shock and horror in the perception of American general public. So this was not perceived in any possible manner in the United States.
Right.
With that said, the positive thing can have the negative thing can have a positive side as well. The release of this college student indeed prompt a senior U.S. official, Mr. Jiu Yun, to travel to Pyongyang to secure his release. That opened an very rare event where senior American officials haven't really visited Pyongyang for a long time. And in recent track-two dialogues in Oslo, for the first time that a sitting incumbent American official took part in the discussion, which signals that the United States wanted to set up its engagement with North Korea.
All of this have a lot to do with a lot of moving factors as we speak. How every parties within this interesting range think about the possibilities. For example, South Korea and the United States. President Moon, the new elected South Korean president, has vowed to take a twin-track approach dealing with Pyongyang by increasing pressure, but also pursuing what he called dialogue. Moon's stance of having closer engagement with the DPRK is nicknamed as the moonshine, as opposed to the sunshine earlier policy. After the sunshine policy started a decade ago, among his appointments, there are several influential people who are eager to engage with DPRK. Cho Myung-gung, if I pronounce the name right, was nominated as his new unification minister and is sympathetic to his northern neighbor, and also former Navy chief as well as his defense minister, who vows to push the reopening of the Kaesong Industrial Park. All of this, one is politically, the other is when it comes to economic and trade ties. We see some messages already being sent. So I want to go to you, Professor Oh. I know you are very skeptical about relinking North and South, but do you think this could also be a window opportunity? When window opportunity is overlapping, there's something that we're really talking about.
Well, the real test for the Moon administration is whether he can pull tricks toward China on the one hand and toward North Korea on the other. And he hasn't shown anything successful yet, but he has always promised that he will hire people who are in favor of talks with North Korea, on the one hand, and who are also in favor of China and U.S. Balanced diplomacy. I think he's taking a very serious action right now, trying to convey his ideas to China and America at the same time, that he's taking a balanced action, which means, if I translate it in simple English, which means South Korea will remain a friend of U.S. and China will be a probably secondary partner when it comes to the deals with North Korea.
Okay.
So that is very clear from his positions.
Very interesting point there. Mr. Zhao, here in Beijing, you see every player about the DPRK issue is trying to play the utmost about all the possibilities. Talking about South Korean president, our South Korean panelists already talked about that. But Mr. Zhao, what about China's role? Can China also have different ways of approaching this, leaving itself more options?
Well, I think even though China wants to do its utmost to help, but I think Chinese influence is really limited because there are deeper problems here. The North and South Koreans, they have very different mindsets. There is this common wisdom that the precondition for engaging with North Korea should be North Korea suspending its at least existing missile tests in the first place. However, North Korea sees its missile tests very differently. It believes that its missile tests are really aimed against the United States, the North Korea's primary enemy, and not really aimed against South Korea. And therefore, North Korea believes that it can engage with South Korea while still keep
Mr.
testing
Zhao, I
missiles.
have to jump in here. I mean, earlier we were talking also. You were saying, well, it has a lot to do with how the North is dealing with the United States. And today you are saying, oh, it depends a lot to do on how the North is dealing with the South. So are you saying China should excuse itself, its own role in this regard?
I think both North Korea and the United States are playing the game of imposing more pressure and see who will blink first. Even the United States, its policy is to impose maximum pressure and then engage. So it has to offer talk at some point. But before that, both countries are doing their utmost to increase their leverage in case there is a negotiation. For China, I think the only possibility is to promote some near-term overturn between the two countries. It's very impossible that we can see fundamental progress overnight. But the only near-term solution, I think, is to, for North Korea to stop its missile tests, and in return for South Korea and the United States to offer something in return. But so far,
I got your point. I got your point. Those points clearly identified already. Mr. Walsh, so I want to go to you. You got two things handled here. One is with South Korea for the United States. The THAAD deployment has been suspended, at least for now. Some say it's not likely to happen anymore, at least for this year. What's going to happen with the summit between the two presidents when they meet very soon? Secondly, you've also got to deal with North Korea, as China really demanded here, because you need to talk to one another. There has to be a way figured out by the two of you, the most critical players. So, Mr. Walsh, talk about those 2 points.
Well, first on the summit, you're right to put your finger on that. I think, let's not rush to judge Moon too early yet. He doesn't even have a full cabinet. May have gotten his foreign minister yesterday, I'm not sure, but there are a lot of positions that are open. I'm going to Seoul on Sunday. I'll have some sense of how far it's progressed, but he needs to get a government in place. And then you're absolutely right. That summit with Trump will be critical, it'll be crucial, and then we'll see what happens. Now on THAAD, I expect Moon to sort of navigate, as your other guests have suggested in a broader sense, navigate between two things. You'll remember that he was pretty darn upset about the fact that there were additional installations made at that THAAD site, and the military did not inform him of that. And that's when he suspended further construction there. And so he has sort of a ready-made excuse to make a pause. So he's not saying, let's get rid of THAAD, but he's also not saying, let's move forward really quickly with THAAD.
What are you suggesting?
I think he'll continue to sort of take that middle course and try to balance the U.S., China, and his own engagement policy. I think that, but I think we need to give him a little time here. He's barely been in office, just a couple of weeks, really.
That's true. That's
true. I think he'll try to balance
That's true, but you know, President Trump and President Kim from North Korea, United States, they've been in the office for quite some time, to say the least. So, Mr. Walsh, should there be some kinds of dialogue, platform, discussion, communication? If you want to move things forward, it has to start from somewhere. Do you have any inside information about where we are?
Well, I think we get a little hint of that. As I say, I think the biggest development here is that you had a U.S. official go to Pyongyang, as our colleague from Carnegie emphasized. So that is a beginning. Having the release of that American is another step in that direction. You're absolutely right that there has to be dialogue, if only to reduce the risk of accidental war, a war that no one wants. That's the best preventive, is communication, and we are starting to see some communication. Hopefully the New York channel will continue to be a piece of that, and it will build from there. I would like to see talks without preconditions. Let's just sit down and talk with no side imposing conditions on the other side. And China has an important role to play there.
Professor Oh from South Korea, how much power do you think President Moon, newly elected one, is having in his hands so that he can play some of the cards he wants to within the national politics in order to have some ways to deal with the DPRK nuclear issue, at least to seek some solutions? Will economic come first or politics come first?
Well, either from either side, he is having a lot of problems because he hasn't barely appointed foreign minister yet. She was supposed to be very proactive in terms of talking to North Korea and talking to China to convince the third deployment by the U.S. Army, but she is not yet approved by the Congress, which also means that it means that President Moon must use his own force to go ahead with the appointment of that new minister, which means that the opposition party, which holds the majority in the Congress, will be very upset about this. They have been sending warnings against the Moon administration for not cooperating with him, especially on the issue of North Korea and the THAAD. So Moon's only hope is to regain parliamentary majority in the next election. But that's a sort of, a hope that is few and far between.
All right. Before we go, gentlemen, I do want to ask a very, very simple question. Give you three choices: hope, no hope, some degrees of hope. Where are we now, DPRK nuclear issue? Mr. Zhao.
I think there is
one choice only.
There is some hope.
Some hope. Professor O.
I would say no hope.
Okay. Mr. Walsh.
Some hope.
2-1. But you know, sometimes we wouldn't just count the numbers in order to know the result. We're going to have to work very hard for it. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us and providing your insight. Zhao Tong, O Yingyu, Jim Walsh. Thank you. You're watching World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Still to come on our program, U.S. filmmaker Oliver Stone has released a docu-series on Russian President Vladimir Putin. But can this series ask Putin the tough questions that the audience has tuned in for? Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live on CGTN Monday to Friday every week. Next, we turn to Russia's annual special call-in show. Vladimir Putin answered the questions on Thursday through direct line on TV channels and radio stations across the country. During the 4-hour TV program, President Putin responds to a variety of questions raised by Russian citizens. Kremlin says this year people submitted over 1.3 million questions via text, email, telephone, and live video. When asked whether he will be president this time next year, Putin didn't give a direct answer, but said that the next term's president should increase people's incomes. Commenting on the FBI investigation, Putin said Comey gave no evidence of Russian meddling and joked if Comey is subject to any sort of prosecution, he will be ready to give the ex-FBI chief political asylum in Russia. People around the world are always curious about what the Russian leader is like behind his macho man exterior. Well, the Putin interviews certainly gives viewers a taste of what's like to be in the Russian president's shoes. 2 years in the making, U.S. Director Oliver Stone is behind the 4-part docu-series shedding light on U.S.-Russia relations and another current hot issue. Before our discussion, take a look at what Stone had presented to all of us.
All right, ready? Action!
Talking to Putin. Oscar winner Oliver Stone released his 4-episode docuseries on the Russian president this week. Conducted between 2015 and 2017, the film gave a closer look at one of the most powerful men in the world and revealed some rarely known details, such as Putin's one-time interest in joining NATO.
Я помню одну из наших последних встреч с президентом Клинтоном, когда еще Клинтон был президентом. Он приезжал в Москву. Да, и я в ходе дискуссии сказал, может быть, посмотреть такой вариант, что Россия может быть вступит в НАТО. Клинтон только ответил, что ж, я не против, но все делегации американские очень занервничала.
Despite that, in the interviews, Putin criticized the alliance for expanding eastward towards Russia's borders.
Сегодня это внешнеполитический инструмент Соединенных Штатов. Там нет союзников, там есть только вассалы. Когда страна становится членом НАТО, ей уже очень трудно сопротивляться давлению со стороны такой крупной страны, лидера НАТО, как США.
Putin also commented on U.S. National Security Agency whistleblower Edward Snowden, the prototype of Oliver Stone's last movie, Snowden.
Сноуден не предатель. Он не предал интересы своей страны и не передал другой стране ни одной информации, которая бы наносила ущерб его народу. Все, что он делает публично.
The first 2 episodes were made available to news media before airing and drew criticism. Some said Stone never brought up Russia's involvement in Syria and other sensitive issues. In the Late Show with Stephen Colbert, Stone insisted the 4th hour will be more hard-hitting. Still, Colbert called the interview an opportunity for Putin to propagandize. The film would humanize Putin, but relations between Russia and the U.S. are still strained. Last week, the Republic of Montenegro officially joined NATO. Meanwhile, the FBI investigation on whether Russia intervened in the 2016 U.S. election is underway. The interview alone could hardly ease tensions.
The Putin interview. For more about that, we're joined in Beijing, Professor Teng Jimeng, freelance movie critic and cultural commentator. Welcome. In Washington, D.C., Christopher Chambers, professor of journalism at Georgetown University. In Moscow, Russia, Dmitry Barbish, political analyst from Sputnik International News Agency. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. I want to start with you, Mr. Barbish. Briefly from you, is the documentary itself produced by Mr. Stone and the annual Q&A session with President Putin similar to one another, all propaganda pieces? What would you say?
Well, I think they are very different because Oliver Stone asks the questions which basically interest the American audience and the global audience. During his Q&A, Putin was asked hard-hitting questions by the citizens. You know, there were underpaid teachers from provincial towns asking him why their salaries are so low. That is very important for Russians, but that obviously doesn't interest Mr. Stone or the viewers in the United States. So these were very different events. But during both of these events, we saw kind of the human side of President Putin. We learned, for example, during the Q&A today that Mr. Putin just recently had his 2nd grandson born. So that was kind of interesting and important. And I think that the Western media has been dehumanizing Putin, and Russia in general has been demonizing Putin and Russia for so long that some human touch is indeed valuable,
well,
even for a change,
Mr.
after
Chambers.
so many years of demonization.
Okay, Mr. Chambers, too much demonization of President Putin, said our Russian panelist, and therefore this docu-series and also this Q&A session really put President Putin back to who he really is. Agree?
Well, we don't really know who he really is. There's so many different interpretations. You'll have one interpretation, particularly of the American right wing who look very favorable on him, ironically. You know, see how things have changed from the Reagan years and the McCarthy years where Russia was demonized. So he's kind of there's almost a fetish on the right in America in his favor. And likewise, you have a lot of people who find him scary, a lot of people who find him a convenient ally. And there are people abroad, if you look in Syria, who probably don't have a very high opinion of him, or in Ukraine. I mean,
what about you?
It depends. There are different. For me, I think he is an archetype of a strongman leader, and people like that do like to have documentaries made about them because it does humanize them. It does serve a purpose. But but if you look at the Q&A, that is propaganda in a way too, because you can basically steer that towards very local problems. So if there are teachers being underpaid, if there are roads that aren't being built, if there's pollution in a certain town, he can address that. Because politicians look very good, whether they're strongmen or someone who's the opposite, Barack Obama, when they deal with very hyper-local questions such as teachers being paid or pollution or a road not being built or a hospital that needs to be built. You look very good taking questions like that, just like you look very good being humanized by Oliver Stone.
Well, Mr. Tong, you certainly have read the taste of our two other panelists. Let me go to you. Is it favorable, let's just put it that way, to be a politically divisive figure by being the Russian president for the American politics?
Well, it's going to be a $1 million question, I'm sure, but I think I'm kind of put in a very delicate situation, and I want to try to strike a balance. I think the film, in fact, tried to offer us a much more kind of a human person, instead of being either lionized this great leader, or some kind of making this guy a kind of a ultimate enemy of the United States. I think that Oliver Stone has done a fine job in portraying a guy who is kind of a disciplined and also very, very kind of a loving father, as well as a shrewd politician. And so in this case, I think that we need to watch this person from a very interesting national context. Look at this guy, the son of a mechanic who fought during the Great Fatherland's War. At the same time, he was also a very caring person. And look at when he was accepting the position from Yeltsin, he was so very much worried about his children and his own life.
But Professor Tong, here's the thing. When the politics are going in very different directions when it comes to these two countries, the United States and Russia, do you have empathy for the leader of the other country? I think that is a very legitimate question to ask.
Well, absolutely. I think in Russia's case, and once again, that we need to go back to this very history of the nation. Now, the nation emerged almost at the end of the 19th century from a feudal
we could go back to the history of the United States as well, more than 200 years old also. But the question is, when you have two countries, the politicians do not necessarily trust one another. And as the metaphor of a possibility to get stronger themselves, create an enemy. So the thing is, do you and will you have empathy toward the leader of another country?
Well, absolutely. I think, once again, you have to think from a national perspective. In the U.S., once again, so you need this very information. And so if in Russia, if it is a general lack of that, perhaps it's kind of information, and then you might be misguided. And so Oliver Stone's attempt is a brave one, in fact, to bring more back from Russia to try to share with these American compatriots.
This is a public intellectual talking in our studio.
So information sharing.
But Mr. Barbish, politicians are not public intellectuals. They might necessarily that interested in so-called facts and truths. Mr. Barbish, what do you make of the possibility? Empathy, really, toward the leader of another country, even though the two countries are trying to make each other, at least verbally, the enemy?
Well, I think that there is a general deficit of human touch in international relations right now. All politicians look very much like each other. So Putin, I think the fascination for him, that Western media, part of it is, of course, connected to the need to demonize Russia, just like there is also a need to demonize China, the last two remaining big powers, which the United States and the EU see as obstacles to their ideal of neoliberal world order. So there is that part to it, but also there is a deficit of politicians with characters, with their own views, you know, politically incorrect politicians. So for that reason, you can have fascination with the figure of Putin, because his views, compared to the standard set of views that the Western politicians have, may appear interesting and original, and that's why our American guest is right. There is a part in the American and European political spectrum which mythologizes Putin from a positive point of view. They present him as some sort of a new kind of Christian leader, which I'm not sure he is. I think that Putin is a very typical representative of the Russian elite who embodies the interests of the Russian elite and consequentially of the Russian state to a certain extent. And I think Putin would not have been very different from, say, the Kazakhstan's leader Nazarbayev or the other leaders of the CIS countries if it hadn't been for a sudden change in the Western policy. If NATO had not expanded to Russia's borders, if NATO and the EU have not provoked the revolution in Ukraine, I think Putin would not be too different from the other leaders of the former Soviet republics.
Mr. Barbish, there's a lot of discussion about the chicken and egg thing, whether which comes first, or actually both sides have been working towards certain possibilities. We're going to put that aside because that's a really geopolitical debate. But, you know, we want to focus on journalism. Professor Chambers, you are working on this. Journalists should have the access to a country and leader and issues that are really controversial and try to present a different side or different size of it. What do you make from this journalism's perspective about Mr. Oliver Stone's docu-series?
Well, documentary form, whether it's in the West or wherever, I mean, it is an art form, but it also is basically a longer form of journalism. A longer form of basically the one-on-one interview, deeper stories, deeper think pieces, even exposés about corruption and things like that. But it does have a point of view. It's better when you have a journalist who is probably at the helm of this project rather than a Hollywood director. I mean, no matter what his body of work might be, I mean, they have a very specific point of view. I think that it is very positive to show, to have these kinds of documentaries, to show these kinds of leaders. However, unless the tough questions are asked, or at least posed, and very directly, and I don't mean, you know, somebody seeing the questions ahead of time or pre-scripting, I mean, talking about Robert Mueller's investigation, talking about Charles Manafort and Flynn, I mean, directly putting it to them, it's really just a movie at that point. You know, so it does serve a purpose. It does educate people, but you need to come at the leader very directly. And if you're not doing that, it's really not providing the educational and enlightenment purpose that it should as a documentary.
Okay, Professor Tong. All right. Can we really change our perceptions no matter what happened? Can we really change some of the issues that what we are thinking about in the other shoes, even when the evidence are clear? I'm not asking this because I think the docu-series is one of those works, but rather I'm asking it genuinely. Can we still, in a very divided world today, be able to have empathy and think about the others by breaking the framework that we think right now about ourselves? Professor Tong.
Yeah, I mean, to a large extent, I think that the world has become even more clear. I mean, clearer, much clearer. I mean, when we see documentaries are actually making this world transparent and kind of offer lots of exposés of the realities, the corruptions, and perhaps even offer us a chance to see the world in much a different way. And so take the United States, for example. I mean, take Oliver Stone, for example, the untold story, untold history of the United States. The most recent work of this very director offers a most different perspective. For example, some of the darkest side of the history, for example, the U.S. involvement in the Second World War and also the Cold War. And so in this case, that it offers a new channel to, in a sense, to review history, to see a person, a true person, and see the personality of that very.
It's very interesting that when we talk about all of these questions, but eventually it has become a judgment of the personality of Mr. Stone rather than the documentary itself. But having said all of that, we are not here to change any person's specific insights, but we are here to offer more information and opinion. Thank you so much, Teng Jimeng, Christopher Chambers, Dmitry Barbich from China, the United States, and Russia. Really appreciate it. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us, World Insight with Tian with CGTN, in your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo as well. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again tomorrow for insights across China and around the world.